Welcome back to FAY Design Virtual Education. Now we'll be going over some of Fay Jones' works, lasting impressions, and his life, as told by Associate Professor and Fay Jones expert Greg Herman.
I'm Greg Herman. I am an Associate Professor at the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design at the University of Arkansas. With the donation of the Fay and Gus Jones house to the School of Architecture and the university in 2015, my relationship with the house became much more formalized. I was named by Peter McKeith, who had become dean in 2014, as the first director of the Fay and Gus Jones House stewardship. And the intention of that position was to first of all, steward the restoration of the house, which began in 2015 and to some degree is still going on, but was substantially completed by 2018. But also to advance scholarship about the house, about Fay Jones generally, and to serve as a liaison between the house and the university and visitors that are interested in Fay Jones, that are interested more specifically in the Fay Jones house. To this point, since 2015, we've had about 1,500 visitors to the house, and we see those numbers climbing every year. Fay Jones met Frank Lloyd Wright for the first time in 1949 in Houston at an American Institute of Architects annual convention. There are a number of versions of the story of how that transpired, but to make a long story short, they became acquainted at that 1949 event and kept in touch. In 1953, Fay and Gus were offered an opportunity to move up to Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin, where Fay would work for Frank Lloyd Wright. He was there. They were there for about 6 months. Now remember, he went up there with his wife and with his two daughters. Virtually all of the other interns, as we call them, working for Frank Lloyd Wright at the time, were single. So it was very difficult for a family of four to be up there. And as a result of that, though it was a fantastic and life-changing event, 6 months was enough for them, and with John Williams' offer to come back down to Arkansas to teach, well, it was an offer that they really couldn't refuse, and they came on back down here. The Hance house is a very early Fay Jones house. It was completed in 1950 for Harold Hance and his family. Harold Hance was faculty in the philosophy department at the University of Arkansas. It's a very, very small house. It was intended to be very minimal, very cost-effective. What's particularly interesting about the Hance house is it shows Fay's ideas before he had a very strong contact with Frank Lloyd Wright. Remember that Fay graduated from undergraduate school at the university here in 1950, and his education was pretty much centered around what I'll call academic modernism. It was much more influenced by California modernism at the time, not so much by Frank Lloyd Wright or by organicism, which comes along later. So the Hance house is a much more modernist, kind of traditional, if that makes sense, traditional modernist expression. The Hance house is important because it shows the breadth of Fay's work. And I think it's very, very important to see what Fay was interested early on in his career before he became much more interested and influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. A friend of mine who grew up in the house right next door to the Hance house likes to refer to the house as the purest form of Fay being Fay, before he worked for Frank Lloyd Wright, before he became so heavily influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. So it's interesting to think of the house in that respect. In 1953, Fay Jones came back to Fayetteville after spending a period in internship at Taliesin, Frank Lloyd Wright's studio and compound in Spring Green, Wisconsin. He came back here at the request of John Williams, who had been his mentor here at the School of Architecture. He lured Fay back to teach, and Fay immediately decided that he wanted to build a house for himself and for his family. By this point he had his wife. He had married his wife, Mary Elizabeth, known as Gus, and they had 2 daughters, Cammie and Janice. They chose to live in a rental house not too far from where we're sitting right now, and they Fay connected with a developer to build 2 houses on the outskirts of Fayetteville. Now, this site at that time was outside the Fayetteville city limits. This was out in the county. He contracted with a developer, as I said, to build 2 houses. The one you see behind me, the Fay and Gus Jones house, and a house immediately to the north of the site. The idea was that with the first house, if it was built out such that Fay and Gus could afford to purchase it from the developer, they would do so. If they could not afford it as built out, it would be sold as a speculative house, and Fay would earn a commission for the project. As it happened, they were able to make financing work with the house. They did purchase it, and they moved in when the house was completed in 1956. Fay had been sketching it for quite some time, beginning in 1953, once he had the site in hand. The second house to the north never quite got much further than what we sometimes call the ruins, though it's really more of a never was. The stone construction on the parcel of land to the north. Second house was never built. So the Fay Jones house always had this very expansive feel in the landscape. The landscape, when the house was first built, was completely open. None of the trees that you see here, with the exception of the large oak at the back of the site, were here. None of these trees. These were all planted by Fay and Gus. The bamboo, which has taken over the north side of the site, was planted by Gus. The procession to the door is very much a Frank Lloyd Wright moment. That is a device that Frank Lloyd Wright used in a number of his projects, most famously the Roby House of 1909, I believe, in Oak Park, Illinois. So it's interesting because you have influences from all parts of Fay Jones's career here. You have aspects of his academic modernism, you have aspects of his own experiences at Taliesin working with Frank Lloyd Wright in the 1950s, but you also have aspects that reach back to Frank Lloyd Wright from almost half a century earlier. Now, to get to the front door of the house, one comes through the carport, through this compressed space, and you begin your procession through this cave and ultimately into the treehouse space as you move through the site. So the door is back here to preserve privacy, to enhance the procession through the site, and to really engage visitors with the landscape and with the architecture before they even come into the house. Two kinds of spaces that Fay loved from his childhood are caves and tree houses. He loved to explore caves as a kid. He loved to build tree houses. He famously built a tree house with a fireplace in it when he was a kid in El Dorado, Arkansas. Those two spaces, those two kinds of spaces really spoke to him. A cave is very primal and inwardly focused and perhaps dark and maybe even damp and maybe mysterious. A treehouse is elevated and light and outwardly focused and perched high. And when you visit the Fay and Gus Jones house, you notice that the lower level is in fact a cave. It is stony, rocky, it's mossy, it's inwardly focused. The light comes from mysterious sources, sometimes from above, not so much from the side. When you go upstairs to the upper level, everything changes. You're then in the treehouse. It's much more outwardly focused. It's glassy, the light is bright. It has a very strong connection to the landscape. And those two things in conjunction make for a very, very powerful composition. The Shaheen Goodfellow House, commonly known as Stoneflower, was a weekend house designed by Fay Jones in north central Arkansas for two families, the Shaheen family and the Goodfellow family. And the idea was that they would share the house on alternating weekends in the summer. What makes that house especially notable is it's another example, like the Fay and Gus Jones house, of the conjunction of the cave space and the treehouse space, but even more dramatically so at the Shaheen Goodfellow house at Stoneflower. The ground floor has a very rocky feel to it. The rocks come up out of the floor, the rocks come out of the walls. There's a shower space where the water comes out of the rocks in the wall. And then perched up above that is the treehouse space, which is really a two-story space with a loft in it. Sleeping space with a long, very long balcony that goes out into the landscape, hangs out into the landscape. And extends the space of the interior of the house outward. The materials Fay chooses to use especially here at the Fay and Gus Jones house and at Stoneflower, the Shaheen Goodfellow house, are local materials primarily. Rock that is commonly found in the Ozarks that you see in the walls behind me, limestone and sandstone. Typically locally harvested wood, although in the case of the house, the Fay and Gus Jones house, this is California redwood. It's interesting to note that originally this house was clad in locally harvested oak. Unfortunately, the oak didn't last, wasn't durable enough, and was replaced by the California redwood ultimately. But the intention in both houses is to use materials that are indigenous to the place and to give the buildings as much of a rootedness in the place as possible through the materials, through rock, through wood, and how those two materials come together. The Applegate House in Bentonville, Arkansas, was designed by Fay in the 1960s, mid-1960s. It's one of the most unusual designs in Fay's entire body of work. There is probably not a straight line anywhere to be found in the house. It's very curvilinear, rocky, but very curvilinear, very stretched, pulled. There's sort of a tension in the way the spaces come together. The curviness and the eccentricity of the house really is thought to be a reflection of Fay's work with Bruce Goff and the sort of eccentric designs by Bruce Goff, who is a very interesting architect based in Oklahoma. Fay Jones had worked for Bruce Goff, teaching at the University of Oklahoma in Norman in 1951 until 1953. And I think a lot of the eccentric details and some of the quirky moments that occur in Fay's architecture in bits and pieces throughout his career, I think can be traced back to the work of Bruce Goff. Well, the Applegate House is undeniably also a Fay Jones house. It is not a Bruce Goff house, it's undeniably Fay. It has Fay's rock work, the overhanging roof, the compressed spaces leading to much more open spaces. So it is, to visitors, an unmistakably Jonesian design. Thorncrown Chapel is the building that really gave Fay his international reputation. It's in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. It was finished in 1980. Since that time, now that it's 40 years old, has had millions, literally millions of visitors from around the world. It has proven to be a very popular pilgrimage point for perhaps liturgical reasons, for religious reasons, but also for people to just experience the architecture. It's very glassy, very open, but it also feels very appropriate to being a space in the woods. The interior is very dense. There are a number of trusses that hold up the roof, that interlace above the seating area. That takes on a very Gothic feel to it, but it's decidedly not Gothic. It's decidedly American, decidedly Fay Jonesian. Thorncrown Chapel in the landscape is really almost a surgical insertion into the landscape. The idea was that no component used in the construction of the chapel would require more than one or two people to carry into the site. And that in and of itself has an organic aspect to it, a site-focused aspect. He was respecting the limitations of the site and respecting the demands of the site, but also the materials and the disposition of the space on the site, the materials, the rock, the wood. We're in the woods, we're on Ozark hillsides, which are very, very notoriously rocky. It's absolutely of the place.
Greg Herman, who you just met, is working with the university's Tesseract Center to create a virtual tour of the Fay and Gus Jones house. Thank you for coming today, and we'll see you later.